I didn't raise my voice. I didn't slam doors. I just started making phone calls. The first one was to my lawyer. The second was to my financial advisor. The third was to a real estate agent I'd known for 20 years. By the time the sun set that evening, I had set something in motion that nobody in my family saw coming. But I'm getting ahead of myself. My name is Robert Chen. I'm 63 years old, and for the past 14 years, I've been a stepfather to a woman named Victoria. When I married her mother, Patricia, Victoria was 18, fresh out of high school, full of plans and dreams that seemed to change every other week. Patricia and I met at a fundraiser in Vancouver. She was a widow, graceful and kind, or so I thought. Victoria had lost her biological father when she was 12. I wasn't trying to replace him. I never said I was her dad. I was just trying to be there. And I was there. For 14 years. I paid for her university tuition when she decided to study business at UBC. I paid for her apartment when she said the dorms were too noisy. I paid for her car when she said she needed reliable transportation. I paid for her trip to Europe when she said it was educational. I paid for her first business venture when she said she wanted to be an entrepreneur. That business failed within 6 months. I didn't say a word. I just paid off the debts and helped her close it down properly. I helped her move 4 times. I fixed her car 3 times when she couldn't afford the mechanic. I was there at 2 a.m. when she called, crying about a breakup. I was there when she got food poisoning and needed someone to drive her to the hospital. I was there when she fought with her mother and needed someone to talk sense into both of them. Patricia always said I spoiled her. Maybe I did. But Victoria was the closest thing I'd ever have to a daughter. My first marriage ended before we had children. This was my second chance at family, and I wanted to do it right. 2 months ago, Victoria got engaged to a man named Connor. Nice enough guy, worked in tech, seemed to make her happy. I was genuinely pleased for her. They set a date for September, planned a big wedding at a vineyard in the Okanagan Valley. 200 guests, string quartet, imported flowers, the works. Patricia asked me one evening how much I thought we should contribute. I told her not to worry about it. I'd take care of the wedding costs. All of them. It's what fathers do, I said. Even stepfathers. Victoria hugged me when I told her. She actually cried a little. She said I was the best, that Connor's family could never afford something like this, that it meant the world to her. Patricia squeezed my hand across the dinner table and smiled at me in that way she used to, back when things were still good between us. I should have known better. 3 weeks ago, Victoria came over to the house with Connor. They wanted to go over some wedding details, seating arrangements, mostly. Who sits where? Who gets placed next to whom? All the little politics of a big wedding. We were in the living room, spreadsheets printed out on the coffee table, when Victoria's phone rang. It was her biological father's brother, her Uncle James. He lived in Toronto. They'd always been close. She put him on speaker. They talked about the wedding. He said he was flying out for it, wouldn't miss it for the world. Then he asked if her dad would have been proud. Victoria's eyes got wet. She said yes, absolutely. They talked about memories, about how her father used to dance with her in the kitchen when she was little. I didn't mind this. I never minded when she talked about her biological father. He was part of her life. I respected that. Then Uncle James said something that made my blood run cold. He said, "And I'm so glad you're keeping it just family, Vicky. Your dad would have wanted that. No outsiders, just the people who really matter." Victoria laughed. She actually laughed. She said, "I know, right? That's exactly what I wanted. Just real family." I looked at Patricia. She was staring at the spreadsheet. She didn't look up. Connor shifted uncomfortably on the couch. I asked Victoria what her uncle meant by that. She looked at me like I'd interrupted something private. She took the phone off speaker and walked into the kitchen. I could hear her voice, muffled, saying something about calling him back later. When she came back, I asked again. She sighed. She said it wasn't a big deal. She said Uncle James was just excited about the wedding. I said, "Victoria, what did he mean by no outsiders?" She looked at Connor. Connor looked at his hands. Then she said it. She said, "Robert, you've been great. You really have. But this is my wedding day. It's about me and Connor, and it's about honoring my real dad's memory. I think it would be better if you didn't come." I didn't understand at first. I thought I'd misheard her. I said, "What?" She said, "I don't want you at the wedding." Patricia finally looked up. She opened her mouth like she was going to say something, but nothing came out. I said, "Victoria, I'm paying for the wedding." She said, "I know, and I'm grateful. I really am. But this isn't about money. This is about what feels right to me. And having you there, sitting in the front row like you're my dad, it just feels wrong. My dad died. You're not him, you're Robert. You've been nice to me, but let's be honest about what this is." The room went silent. Connor said, very quietly, "Vicky, maybe we should talk about this later." She ignored him. She was looking at me now, and her expression wasn't angry. It was almost pitying. She said, "I've been thinking about this a lot. The more I plan this wedding, the more I realize I want it to be authentic. I want to honor my father. I want his memory there. And I can't do that if you're sitting there pretending to be him." I said, "I never pretended to be your father." She said, "You kind of did, though. You always acted like you had some right to be involved in my life. You always acted like I owed you something." Patricia said, very softly, "Victoria, that's not fair." Victoria turned on her mother. She said, "Mom, you know it's true. Robert's always been hovering, always asking questions, always trying to be part of everything. I'm 28 years old. I don't need a dad anymore. I especially don't need a fake one." I stood up. I needed to move, needed to do something other than sit there listening to this. I said, "So you want me to pay for your wedding, but not attend it?" She said, "I mean, if you want to put it that way, yes. I'm not saying you have to pay for it, but you offered. If you don't want to anymore, that's fine. Connor and I will figure something out." I looked at Patricia again. She was crying now, silently, tears just running down her face. But she didn't say anything. She didn't tell Victoria to stop. She didn't defend me. That's when I knew. This wasn't just Victoria. Patricia agreed with her. Maybe not out loud, but in the way she stayed silent, in the way she wouldn't look at me. I could see it. She'd been thinking the same thing. I was the outsider. I'd always been the outsider. I said, very calmly, "All right?" Victoria blinked. She said, "All right, what?" I said, "All right, I won't come to the wedding. Is there anything else you need to tell me?" She looked relieved. She actually smiled a little. She said, "No, that's it. I'm glad you understand, Robert. I really am. This doesn't change anything between us. I still care about you, but this day is special, and I need it to be right." Connor stood up. He said they should probably get going. Victoria agreed. They gathered their papers and headed for the door. Before she left, Victoria turned and said, "Thanks for being cool about this, Robert. You're a good guy." Then they were gone. Patricia and I sat in the living room for a long time without speaking. Finally, she said, "She didn't mean it the way it sounded." I said, "Yes, she did." She said, "She's just emotional about the wedding. She misses her father. You can't take it personally." I said, "Patricia, your daughter just told me I'm not family, that I'm an outsider, that I've been pretending for 14 years. How exactly am I supposed to take that?" She didn't answer. I said, "And you didn't say anything. You sat there and let her say all of that, and you didn't say one word in my defense." She said, "What did you want me to say? She's my daughter, Robert. I can't control how she feels." I said, "You could have told her she was wrong. You could have told her I've been there for her since she was 18 years old. You could have told her that family isn't just blood." Patricia wiped her eyes. She said, "Maybe she's right, though. Maybe we've all been pretending." That was the moment I knew my marriage was over. I didn't argue with her. I didn't try to change her mind. I just stood up, walked upstairs to my office, and closed the door. Then I started making those phone calls. The next morning, I told Patricia I needed to take care of some business. I'd be out most of the day. She barely looked up from her coffee. I met with my lawyer first. Her name is Dorothy, and we've known each other for 30 years. I told her everything. She listened without interrupting, then pulled out a notepad and started writing. She said, "Are you sure about this, Robert?" I said, "Completely." She said, "This is going to hurt a lot of people." I said, "They hurt me first." She nodded. She said, "All right then. Let's talk about the house." The house Patricia and I lived in was in my name only. I'd owned it for 5 years before we got married, and we'd never changed the title. It was a nice house in North Vancouver, 4 bedrooms, view of the mountains, worth about $2 million. Patricia had moved in when we got married. Her name wasn't on anything. Dorothy said I had every legal right to sell it. Patricia would have no claim unless she could prove she'd contributed significantly to the mortgage or renovations. She hadn't. I'd paid for everything. I asked Dorothy how long it would take to sell a house like this if I wanted to move quickly. She said, "In this market, you could have it sold in 2 weeks if you price it right." I said, "Do it." Next, I met with my financial advisor, Gerald. I told him I needed to liquidate some investments and move money around. I wanted everything separated, everything clean, no joint accounts, no shared assets. I wanted to know exactly what was mine and what needed to be protected. Gerald asked the same question Dorothy had. Was I sure? I was sure. He said it would take a few days to sort everything out, but it could be done. Then I met with a real estate agent named Marcus. He'd sold me the house originally. I told him I wanted to list it immediately. I wanted it sold before the end of the month. He whistled. He said, "That's fast, Robert. What's going on?" I said, "I'm making a change." He said he could do it. He'd have photographers out that week. We'd list it high, see what happened. I thanked him and went home. Patricia was in the kitchen when I got back. She asked where I'd been. I said, "Taking care of things." She said Victoria had called, wanted to know if we could all have dinner next week to finalize some wedding details. I said, "You can have dinner with her. I'm not going." Patricia frowned. She said, "Robert, don't be like this." She apologized. I said, "No, she didn't." Patricia said, "Well, she feels bad. That's basically the same thing." I said, "It's not." I went upstairs. I had work to do. Over the next 2 weeks, I moved through the house like a ghost. Patricia asked me several times what was wrong. I told her nothing. I was just busy. She seemed to accept that. The for sale sign went up on a Tuesday. Patricia saw it when she came home from her book club. She came into my office, holding her car keys, face pale. She said, "Why is there a for sale sign on our lawn?" I said, "Because I'm selling the house." She said, "You're what?" I said, "I'm selling the house. It's mine. I'm selling it." She said, "You can't do that. I live here." I said, "Not for much longer." She stared at me. She said, "Robert, what is going on?" I said, "I'm disappearing, Patricia. That's what Victoria wanted, isn't it? For me to not be there? Well, I'm taking her advice. I'm removing myself from this family." She said, "This is insane. You're being ridiculous." I said, "No, I'm being clear. Your daughter made it very clear that I'm not family. You made it very clear by staying silent. So I'm acting accordingly." Patricia started crying. She said this wasn't fair, that I was overreacting, that Victoria didn't mean it. I said, "She meant it, and so did you." She begged me to reconsider. She said we could talk about this, go to counseling, work things out. I said counseling wouldn't change the fact that after 14 years, I was still just the outsider who paid for things. The house sold in 9 days. A young couple from Hong Kong, cash offer, $2.3 million. Marcus called me personally to say it was the fastest sale he'd seen in years. I accepted immediately. Closing was set for 3 weeks later. Patricia moved into a hotel. She called me every day, sometimes twice a day, begging me to stop this. I didn't answer most of the calls. When I did, I kept it short. The decision was made. Victoria called me too. She was angry. She said I was being cruel to her mother. She said I was punishing them both for one mistake. She said she'd already apologized. What more did I want? I said, "You didn't apologize, Victoria. You said you felt bad. That's not the same thing." She said, "Fine, I'm sorry. Okay, I'm sorry." "Is that what you want to hear?" I said, "It's 14 years too late." She said, "What does that even mean?" I said, "It means I spent 14 years being there for you, and the moment it mattered, you told me I was nobody. So now I'm acting like nobody. I'm disappearing, just like you wanted." She started crying. She said I was ruining her wedding, ruining her life, ruining everything. I said, "Victoria, I'm not coming to your wedding. I'm not paying for your wedding. I'm not paying for anything anymore. You're 28 years old. You'll figure it out." She said, "You already promised to pay." I said, "And you promised I was part of the family." We both said things that turned out not to be true. Then I hung up. Connor called me the next day. He was polite, careful. He said he understood I was upset, but could we please talk this through like adults? I said, "Connor, this doesn't involve you." He said, "It kind of does. You're pulling funding for our wedding." I said, "I'm pulling funding for a wedding I'm not invited to. That seems fair to me." He said Victoria was willing to invite me now if that's what it took. I said, "I don't want a pity invitation, Connor. I want to be respected. Since that's apparently not possible, I'm removing myself from the situation." He tried to argue. I wished him well and ended the call. The closing date arrived. I'd already moved most of my personal belongings into a storage unit. I'd rented a small condo downtown, something temporary, while I figured out my next move. The night before the new owners took possession, I went back to the house one last time. It was empty. All the furniture was gone, sold, or donated. My footsteps echoed on the hardwood floors. I walked through each room slowly. The living room where Victoria had told me I wasn't family. The kitchen where Patricia and I used to have coffee every morning. The bedroom where we'd slept for 14 years. In the kitchen, I left something on the counter, a black binder. Inside that binder was a record of every single expense I'd incurred for Victoria over the past 14 years. Tuition receipts, rent payments, car payments, business loan payoffs, groceries, utilities, medical bills, travel expenses, everything. I'd spent months compiling it, going through old bank statements, credit card bills, receipts I'd kept in file boxes. Dorothy had helped me organize it all chronologically. The total came to $473,000. Each page was labeled with the date, the amount, and what it was for. At the end of the binder, I'd included a letter. The letter said, "Victoria, you told me I was not your father. You told me I was an outsider. You told me I had been pretending for 14 years. You were wrong about the pretending. I never pretended. I was genuine in everything I did for you. But you were right that I'm not your father. Your father passed away when you were 12. I'm just the man who took care of you after that." This binder represents what that care looked like in financial terms. I'm not asking you to pay me back. Money was never the point. But I wanted you to see it. I wanted you to understand what it means when someone chooses to be there for you. Your real father would have done the same things I did, probably more. He would have loved you unconditionally. He would have supported your dreams, even the ones that failed. He would have been there at 2 a.m. when you needed him. I tried to do that too. I tried to be someone you could count on. You've made it clear that wasn't enough, or perhaps that it was too much, or perhaps that it simply didn't matter because I wasn't the right person. That's your choice to make, but it's also my choice to accept it and move forward. I'm not coming to your wedding. I'm not paying for your wedding. I'm not paying for anything else in your life. Not because I'm angry, though I am. Not because I want revenge, though part of me does. But because you asked me to disappear, and I'm respecting that request. I hope your wedding is everything you want it to be. I hope Connor makes you happy. I hope your life is full of people who meet your standards for what real family means. I won't be one of those people. Take care of yourself, Victoria. Robert. I left the binder on the counter, locked the door behind me, and drove to my new condo. The next morning, my phone started ringing at 7:30. It was Patricia. She was screaming. I'd never heard her scream like that before. She'd gone to the house to pick up some items she'd left behind. The new owners had given her permission to stop by before they moved in. That's when she found the binder. She'd read the whole thing, then she'd called Victoria. Victoria had driven over. They'd both read it again, sitting on the floor of the empty kitchen. Patricia kept screaming into the phone. She said I was cruel. She said I was petty. She said I'd turned a family disagreement into a war. I said, Patricia, Victoria told me to disappear. I disappeared. I don't understand why you're surprised. She said, you've destroyed everything. The wedding is in 6 weeks. How is she supposed to pay for it? I said, that's not my problem anymore. She said, $400,000, Robert? You kept track of every penny? What kind of person does that? I said, the kind of person who wanted to remember that he mattered, since apparently nobody else was going to remember it for me. Victoria got on the phone. She was crying so hard I could barely understand her. She said she was sorry. She said she didn't mean it. She said she'd been stupid and selfish, and she understood now what I'd done for her. I said, Victoria, you meant it. You meant every word. The only thing you're sorry about is that there are consequences. She said, please, Robert, please don't do this. I'll invite you to the wedding. You can sit in the front row. You can walk me down the aisle. Whatever you want. I said, I don't want a pity invitation. I wanted respect. I wanted to be treated like I mattered. You made it clear that I don't, so now I'm living accordingly. She begged. She said she'd pay me back, every penny, even though she had no idea how. I said, keep your money. Spend it on therapy instead. Maybe figure out why you think people are disposable. Then I hung up. Over the next few days, I received calls from Uncle James in Toronto, from Connor, from 2 of Patricia's sisters, from Victoria's best friend. Everyone wanted to tell me I was being unreasonable. Everyone wanted to tell me I was hurting people over nothing. I stopped answering my phone. Connor eventually sent me an email. He said they'd had to downsize the wedding significantly. They were moving it from the Okanagan Vineyard to a small restaurant in Vancouver. The guest list had been cut from 200 to 50. No string quartet, no imported flowers, just a simple ceremony and dinner. He said Victoria was devastated. He said Patricia wasn't speaking to Victoria, blamed her for destroying the family. He said this whole thing was tearing everyone apart. He asked, one more time, if I'd reconsider. I didn't reply. The wedding happened on schedule. I know because Patricia's sister posted photos on Facebook. It looked nice. Small, but nice. Victoria wore a simple dress. Connor wore a suit. They smiled for the camera. I felt nothing looking at those photos. Not satisfaction, not anger, not sadness. Just nothing. 3 months after the wedding, Patricia filed for divorce. I didn't contest it. Dorothy handled everything. The divorce was finalized in 6 months. Patricia sent me one letter during that time. She said she hoped I was happy now that I'd destroyed our family. She said she'd wasted 14 years on me. She said I was a bitter, small man who couldn't handle his ego being bruised. I didn't respond to that either. Victoria sent me a letter too. It was long, rambling, full of apologies and explanations. She said she'd been stressed about the wedding. She said she hadn't thought about what she was saying. She said she understood now how much I'd done for her, and she'd spend the rest of her life being grateful. I didn't believe her, but I appreciated the effort. I didn't respond to that either. 6 months after the divorce, I moved to Victoria, the city, not the person. I'd always liked the island. It was quieter there. I bought a small house overlooking the ocean, something I could afford easily with the money from selling the Vancouver house and splitting assets with Patricia. I started volunteering at a community center, teaching financial literacy to young adults. I joined a hiking group. I took up painting, something I'd always wanted to try but never had time for. People ask me sometimes if I had family. I said I used to, but not anymore. They usually didn't ask follow-up questions. I'm 63 years old now. I've got enough money to live comfortably for the rest of my life. I've got hobbies I enjoy, friends I see regularly, a routine that makes me happy. I don't think about Victoria much anymore. When I do, I don't feel angry, I just feel distant, like she's someone I used to know a long time ago. I don't think about Patricia either. I think about myself, and the choices I made, and whether I'd do anything differently. I wouldn't. People think revenge is about hurting the person who hurt you. It's not. Revenge is about taking back your dignity. It's about refusing to let someone treat you like you don't matter, and then continue benefiting from your presence. I didn't destroy my family. They did that when they decided I was disposable. I just accepted their decision and acted accordingly. Victoria wanted me to disappear. So I did. Not in the way she meant, where I'd quietly absent myself from the wedding, but still be there to pay for everything. Still be there to call when she needed something. Still be there to play the role of the grateful stepfather who knew his place. I disappeared completely. I took my money, my time, my energy, and I redirected it toward people who actually valued it. That's not cruelty. That's self-respect. Last month, I got a message through Facebook from Connor. He said Victoria had given birth to their first child, a daughter. He said they'd named her Patricia, after her grandmother. He said Victoria had been talking a lot about family lately, about how she wanted to do better with her daughter than she'd done with the people who'd cared for her. He said she'd like to talk to me sometime if I was open to it. I read the message twice, then deleted it. I'm 63 years old. I don't have time to teach grown adults how to treat people with respect. That's something they should have learned a long time ago. I've got a painting class this afternoon. Tomorrow I'm hiking up Mount Douglas with my group. Next week I'm starting a workshop on retirement planning at the community center. My life is full. It's quiet, but it's full. And it's mine. Victoria got what she asked for. I disappeared. And in doing so, I found something I didn't even know I'd lost. Myself.